Imagine if overnight every home, every farm, every village in Britain was entered into a single spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet decided who owned what, who owed what, and who truly held power. That's not a modern government database. That was the Domesday Book of 1086. A survey so vast and so detailed that even today, historians and economists call it one of the most extraordinary documents in European history. But how did England get from the chaos of the Norman invasion in 1066 to a moment when William the Conqueror could catalogue a kingdom like an accountant? And how did this reshaping of land and law leave legacies we can still trace in the countryside and even in the structure of British society today? When William, Duke of Normandy, crossed the Channel in 1066, he didn't just bring an army, he brought an entirely new system of organising power. For centuries, Anglo-Saxon England had been governed by networks of lords, thanes and assemblies known as witan. Landholding was flexible, shaped by kinship and local custom. But William's victory at Hastings brought something different. As soon as Harold fell, England's ruling elite began to fall too. In less than a generation, the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy was almost completely replaced. By 1086, fewer than 5% of the great landowners were English. The rest were Norman, Breton, or Flemish. Imagine the shock for a farmer who had served his local thane for years, only to find that overnight his land was handed to a knight who barely spoke his language. What did that mean for local loyalties, for law, for taxation? We'll come back to that, but first, how did William impose this new system so effectively? William's solution was feudalism, but not quite the kind you might picture from French castles and medieval romancers. In England, it was sharper, tighter, and far more centralised. Every acre of land, William claimed, was ultimately his. In theory, everyone else only held it from him. Whether you were a great baron with 10 castles, or a villein ploughing one strip of land. That claim changed everything, because if all land ultimately belonged to the king, then loyalty ran not through tangled local ties, but upwards directly to the crown. William's followers became tenants-in-chief, owing knights and service to him. Those knights in turn had peasants beneath them. It was like a pyramid of obligation, land flowing downwards, loyalty flowing upwards. But how do we know this wasn't just theory? How did William make it real? That's where the Domesday Book comes in. In 1086, fearing invasion from Denmark and rebellion at home, William ordered a survey unlike anything else England had ever seen. Commissioners fanned out across the shires, asking the same 3 questions about every holding. Who held this land in the time of King Edward? That's before 1066. Who holds it now under William? And what is it worth in terms of taxes, resources, livestock and men? The results were compiled into the Domesday Book, nearly 900 pages of dense Latin, listing everything from villages and churches to mills, vineyards, and even pigs in the forest. One monk later wrote that it was called Domesday because its judgments were final, like the Last Judgment itself. No appeal, no argument. If the Domesday said your land was worth 10 hides, your land was worth 10 hides. But what did that feel like for the ordinary people whose lives were recorded in those entries? Let's imagine our composite character, Edric, a smallholder in Lincolnshire. His father had held land under Anglo-Saxon lords, but when the commissioners came, Edric's world was written down in Norman Latin. The entry might say something like, in Lincolnshire, in the wapentake of Bradley, Edric holds 1 virgate of land. He has 1 ox, he pays rent to Hugh, tenant of Count Allen. To Edric, it wasn't just a record, it was a transformation. His Anglo-Saxon lord was gone. His dues were now set by a Norman. His rights, his obligations, even his name, all were frozen in a royal ledger he would never see. The Domesday Book didn't just count England, it fixed it, making land and labour something to be taxed, inherited or confiscated. And once it was written, it could not be unwritten. But the book wasn't just about peasants like Idric, it was about power. So what did that mean for England's new elite? For William's Norman followers, the Domesday Book was a guarantee. If your name appeared as tenant-in-chief, your claim to the land was backed not just by the sword, but by the king's written record. Imagine being a Norman baron, newly granted vast estates in Yorkshire. Without Domesday, your right might be challenged by locals loyal to the old lords. With Domesday, your name was literally written into the kingdom's permanent memory. It was in effect a legal title deed, centuries before modern land registries. Land disputes could be resolved not by memory or oral testimony, but by pointing to the royal book. And once that system was in place, it reshaped the very landscape. But how? The Domesday wasn't a map in the modern sense, but it created a new mental map of England. Shires, hundreds, tithings, all neatly listed and assessed. It showed where power lay and who held it. Look at the distributions. Regions like the south and east were rich and densely recorded. The north, ravaged by William's harrying of the north, was sparse. That very absence of entries is evidence of destruction. In effect, the Domesday created a grid, not of lines on paper, but of obligations, rents and taxes. It gave the Crown unprecedented oversight of resources and gave future governments the habit of thinking in terms of data, assessment and control. But was this grid permanent, or could it be challenged? There were rebellions, of course. English landowners who lost estates fought bitterly against Norman lords. Whole regions rose up and were crushed, but the system itself endured. Even kings who followed William used the Domesday Book as a reference. Henry II's legal reforms in the 12th century, Edward I's taxation drives in the 13th, all drew on the precedent of having the kingdom written down, categorised and made accountable. And yet, within that system, English traditions also persisted. Place names, local customs, village meetings, all survived alongside Norman lordship. The feudal grid reshaped but did not erase the patchwork of England. So what does Domesday's legacy look like today? If you live in Britain today, you may still see echoes of Domesday. Boundaries of counties and parishes that appear on 21st century maps often trace back to those listed in 1086. Many of the great estates still owned by aristocratic families were first recorded in Domesday. And in another sense, every time you fill in a census form or see your property recorded in a land registry, you are part of that tradition begun by William's survey, a state that knows who holds what and claims the right to record it. Edric the smallholder might never have imagined that his meagre ox and vergate of land would become part of a record studied nearly 1,000 years later. But his life and the lives of millions like him were fixed into history by the Norman grid. The Norman Conquest wasn't just a battle in 1066. It was a transformation of how land, power and law were imagined. The Domesday Book wasn't just a survey. It was the creation of a new England, ruled by data as much as by swords. It showed that whoever controls the record controls the kingdom. And it set a precedent that authority could be exercised not only by castles and armies, but by paperwork, a lesson that still shapes how Britain is governed today. But the Norman grid was only the beginning. Thank you for walking a little further down the road that made Britain with me. The story winds on. Try this one. I think you'll like it. Until then, thanks so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you very soon.